This is TLV1.
The Tel Aviv Review.
Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review, a program dedicated to the word, to the thought and to debate, brought to you by the Van Leer Jerusalem Institute, which promotes humanistic, democratic and liberal values in the social discourse in Israel. I'm your host Gilad Halpern, and this interview is being recorded on the premises of the annual conference of the Association for Israel Studies at Brandeis University. My guest today is a lecturer at Ben Gurion University's Institute for the Study of Israel and Zionism, and the author of a new book entitled Revoking Citizenship, Expatriation in America from the Colonial Era to the War on Terror. It was recently published by New York University Press. Dr. Ben Herzog, hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review.
Hello, good morning.
So most people are under the impression that in a democracy at least, citizenship is an inalienable right. Are they wrong?
Right. More or less they're not wrong, but on the other hand, most democracies also have laws that can allow the state to take citizenship. I mean, usually those immigrants or naturalized citizens are more at risk than native-born citizens, but also sometimes native-born citizens also can lose citizenship. And in this book, I looked specifically on the United States, and which this right, this idea of citizenship is even stronger. But even in the United States, thousands or hundreds of thousands, actually hard to know the numbers, of citizens were stripped of their civil rights.
But it has to be under very specific circumstances, right? I mean, the provisions, it's kind of an extreme case, and the provisions are exceptional.
It depends on which time, what perspective you look at it. For example, so some of those regulations seem to us like very obvious, like betrayal or espionage or things which seems like very severe, and terrorism, like excuses, it's like logical and reasonable excuses to take away citizenship. But if you look in the past, so in the United States, for example, until 1922, women who married foreigners would lose their American citizenship. So even like native-born, American-born citizens would lose your citizenship if they just married someone from abroad. So in our current...
And continued to live in America or moved to their husbands' countries? Even if
the marriage itself, this was the act of what's called Expatriation Act, this act that would cause one to lose their citizenship.
And did that entail being expelled from the country, deportation? I mean, what is really the practical, what are the practical provisions of expatriation?
This is a good question, and I'm not sure I have the right answer in a sense of how it was practiced, because we don't have much details on that. But I do know that most of the cases, actually the states, and not just the state, other United States, the other countries, actually took away citizenship from citizens who are already abroad. Mm-hmm. They have the conflict whether to deport someone or not, because he already wasn't in the country, so you just wouldn't allow him to come or her to come back.
Mm-hmm. But why did you choose to focus on the United States? Is it because, the concept of dual citizenship is so common here, or is it because the country was formed in opposition to another country, and therefore these questions were more pertinent in the American case, rather than, just, any other European democracy where most of the population was just a citizen by, just virtue of just being there?
Well, there are two maybe explanations. One is more technical, and one more theoretical. So the technical, first it's based on my PhD, which I did in the United States, and there is a focus in the United States to work on the United States. Okay. But also I did, my PhD actually wasn't about this project. It was about a comparison between the United States, Israel, and Canada. And this comes to the more substantial reason why the United States. I was looking at democratic countries who took away citizenship. we tend to think about taking away citizenship as something common or more common in totalitarian countries like the Soviet Union in the past, or Nazi Germany, South Africa apartheid. So
and that they didn't have to justify it.
Yeah, and they didn't have.
So it's less interesting.
Or sometimes they had to justify it, but it's not surprising in a sense that they did so. But it is surprising that they did so in the United States, especially as the emphasis on civil liberties, on natural rights, and they did it not only in the past of the United States, but they actually did it until the 80s. So I think it is surprising. The other reason is that the United States is one of the most, of course, superpowers, and when shape how other countries also think about ideas of citizenship, dual citizenship, let's say gender relations, and so forth. So they shape our discourse about citizenship.
Mm-hmm. So tell us about the first case of expatriation in American history. How did it come about, and how did it really create a legal legacy of sorts?
Well, the first case, and actually it's very much relevant to my overall point, is actually something that never happened. It's called the 13th Amendment. And actually it's not the 13th Amendment we know now. There was supposed to be another amendment, which is called the 13th Amendment. And it actually passed. And the idea was that to strip citizens, American citizens, who had got another title from another country in Europe.
By title, you mean what?
Like nobility title,
right.
or kind of a recognition of a state. And this is something that was common in Europe, and the United States said, no, we are not willing for Americans to get this title. And if they do get those honorable titles from Europe, they would lose their American citizenship. And
was it in opposition to the British all along, or in specifically, or was it?
It wasn't necessarily. It's the idea that, again, I think the idea of dual citizenship, the idea that you should be loyal to one state, one country, so you cannot have recognition from the two different opposing countries. There could be other reasons, which we are not maybe like personal. It was a law that the Liberty wanted to take citizenship for a certain person or a certain politician. I'm not sure, but the language was against the idea of dual citizenship. And it wasn't legislated. I think it passed, but it didn't get.
What period are you talking about?
I think in the 18th century. But the next thing was in the end, during the Civil War. This is the actual case which first happened, that deserters from the Union would be stripped of American citizenship. In the Confederacy, actually, the punishment was much worse, in a sense that it was like sometimes not even death, but actually torture and other kinds of punishments, But in the Union, the decision was to take away citizenship from deserters. And in a way, this was the first time this kind of policy was enacted. Again, today, in our minds, it would seem like a harsh punishment or something that we shouldn't do.
But what were the legal provisions for that? Was it really desertion? Was it treason? I mean, how did they?
I think I don't remember exactly the dates when treason got in. I think actually treason got only later on in the 20th century. But I think desertion from the army it's what, as I said before, what's called Expatriation Act. It's an act that Congress, following that, Congress could take or the legal system can take your citizenship away. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean that all deserters or spies or all women who married foreigners automatically lost citizenship, but the Congress could take, if they wanted, they could take their citizenship away.
Mm-hmm. And how did it evolve over time with the evolution of the American democracy? I mean, we know that in the 19th century and even well into the 20th century, there were many democratic deficiencies that were gradually rectified. What about the question of revocation of citizenship?
In a sense, at least we would still see this progression or more laws that would, or reasons to take away citizenship during the 20th century. It would only fade in the last, let's say, quarter of the 20th century. We'll talk about that in a minute. But I wouldn't say it's a deficiency of democracy, but it has some. My argument has much to do with the idea of dual citizenship. Dual citizenship was something was accepted in the modern world, in democracies. You should have one citizenship and only one. And
because it also required some sort of active participation.
Participation, the idea of loyalty, the idea of identity. And it's even more it's strong in immigration countries, which you actually move from one country to another.
So it's like a voluntary act. Right?
Yeah, and this is also something which is very much connected to the United States and how it's different, let's say, from Britain. In the past, in European countries, or especially in Britain, that the idea was that you cannot change your citizenship. If you're born British, you'll stay British until your death. Mm-hmm. And you cannot change, you cannot become American, for example. And for Americans, it was very troubling, especially because they wanted to shape a new American identity and American citizenship. And
they didn't want to be British.
And they didn't want to be British. And so they came out with the idea that you can actually choose to naturalize, to immigrate from one country to another. But they still kept the idea that even if you move, you can have only one. You cannot move and have both be British and American or French and American, but you are allowed to change your citizenship but still have only one. It means that you need to give away your citizenship. So the idea in Congress, or the logical, political, philosophical logic, was that if you move and you give away your citizenship, fine. But if you don't do that, the state will do it for you. So it will take your citizenship away. And so when you think about the evolution of the revocation of citizenship, it has to do much with our ideas about dual citizenship. And how do we think? And only in the late 20th century, and especially today, like 21st century, we think about dual citizenship as something which is agreeable, something which is common, something which doesn't pose any concerns.
Especially in the United States.
Yeah, and you can also think about it's also practical. There are millions of Americans who, theoretically at least, have a dual citizenship, who immigrated from another country. So it means that they kept their citizenship.
So how did this come about? It's a major sea change.
Well, yeah, so I want to say another thing about the evolution. Okay. About the evolution is a bit connected also to what I talked about in the book, is about wars. Usually the idea of loyalty, of single allegiance comes stronger in times of war, in times of conflict. And you can see that during most American wars, whether it's the Civil War, or the Second World War, Korea War, you could see more and more reasons to take away, to regulate the idea of single citizenship. Now, the changes came primarily from the judicial system. The Supreme Court, the first ruling was in 1958, decided that actually you cannot take it as a punishment. Punishment is too cruel and unusual, it was called. But still, this practice kept on going. They just said that, well, it's not a punishment. It's just regulating allegiance or something like that. It's, we're not doing it as a punishment.
Who were the cases that were affected by it? Like, what grounds were given for?
Well, in the 50s, let's say.
Yeah, after that Supreme Court ruling.
Well, you could, again, the most, I think, first obvious one was actually taking away citizenship. Taking another citizenship in another country. So American choosing to become French. So it's like a reason, we don't want to be American anymore. But it could only also have reasons which have the same meaning, but it's not the actual case. So, for example, we're not allowed to serve in another country's army. Because if you serve in another country's army, it's a signal that you're not loyal to the United States anymore, or to serve in a certain position, or be elected to, or even vote to another country's parliament.
These provisions still exist in many democracies around the world, right?
Yes, and actually they still exist in some of them still exist in the United States. But another change that came in the 60s, that the idea of intent. The Congress is not enough to know that you did this Expatriation Act, but you need to show that he also or she did it with intent not to become American. So I start the book actually with a very one of the latest examples in the war in Afghanistan, that this was this American who joined the Taliban, fought against American troops, actively fought, and in one of the skirmishes, he actually was caught, and one of the provincial lawyers, the American, wanted to take his citizenship away, and they couldn't do that because there was no proof that he did so. He fought American troops with the intent of not becoming American. They couldn't prove it because he didn't say.
Sounds like something that you can hardly prove, right?
Well, there are cases you can prove, but it's hard. And this is maybe a bit connected to the Israeli case for one of the cases, Meir Kahane, which was elected to the Israeli parliament, and they actually thought, well,
who was an American citizen?
He was an American citizen. He was elected to the Israeli parliament, and they wanted to take his citizenship away. And the first ruling was that they could prove. They thought they could prove that he didn't want to become American. They looked at his public speeches, and they thought, well, you can see from his own words that he doesn't want to be American. Mm-hmm. But it's a hard case, and actually he appealed, and it was repealed, especially on this case, but what he did, and what actually this is another thing that the United States do, is that if you can sign, what's called renunciation, you can sign that you don't want to be American anymore. Mm-hmm. And once you sign this document, it's like a proof that you don't want to become American.
Yeah, but the thing is that this comes from the individual rather than the state. So
yeah, this is the whole logic of the legal system. It said, well, it's not only should not be a punishment, it has to be, if not someone to want to lose American citizenship, it has to be an individual act, individual choice.
Yeah. What I'm more interested in is really the act of actually stripping American citizenship from people who haven't necessarily done anything knowingly that would. I want to know how the new provisions that emanated following the war on terror changed that.
Well, yeah, and this is a good question because it depends who you ask, in a sense, from the legal perspective. Because from a pure legal perspective, and some lawyers say, well, those provisions would never pass. They will be deemed as unconstitutional, and no, the Supreme Court will not let those provisions pass, and it didn't actually. In a sense, they say, well, it's just like empty words. Politicians want, to show they're tough on terror, but in a sense that it wouldn't actually pass. It doesn't have real implications. We don't, from a legal perspective, we don't need to take them seriously. Mm-hmm. What I'm a sociologist, and actually I do take them seriously, and because it means that what like the worldview of people, politicians still believe this is a legitimate thing to do. People believe it's something. The dual citizenship is sometimes unaccepted. So, from a social perspective, I think the idea of stripping away citizenship still exists. Mm-hmm. Some people still believe that if you, and some prominent, let's say in the United States, prominent politicians would argue, yes, if you did a terrorist act, we should take your citizenship away. Although legally it's impossible, socially it's still, I would argue, accepted.
Do you think that at some point it will become legally possible because of the erosion that comes from the realm of sociology? It's
a good question. Probably not. I think if you think about the constitutional system, the legal system in the United States, it's really difficult. It will be difficult to, unless you change the constitution, which can happen, but it's unlikely that it will happen. I can think about two things that connected to that. First, we know that it happens in other democratic countries, like in the United Kingdom. Actually, they did decide that you can take away citizenship, and we can see all over the world countries trying to pass legislations in this spirit. Mm-hmm. The other thing...
But that is only confined to people with dual citizenship, right? I mean, I'm trying to think what will happen to someone with a single citizenship.
Well, this is another, I think, interesting thing that happened. I'm trying to think in 51, I think. But after the Second World War, there was this, especially after the Holocaust, in reaction to it, there was a very strong emphasis, and also international conventions and agreements, that you're not allowed, state cannot turn someone stateless. So you are allowed to take citizenship away, but only if you have another one. Mm-hmm. You're not allowed to take it away if it makes the person stateless. So most countries apply this notion or within their own laws. So actually for the United States, but other countries, you cannot take away citizenship unless the person has dual citizenship. So in a way, you can only, if you think about terrorism, you can only punish terrorists who have dual citizens.
Yeah.
You know, so in a way, it's like a half-baked idea.
Yeah.
So it's a good question, but sociology, we're not good prophets.
Yeah.
So,
Now we have to take it home to Israel. I mean, we cannot avoid the question, because the question of revocation of citizenship always comes up. Normally when a populist politician comes up and says that certain Israeli Arab may lose their citizenship because of things that they did against the state, in inverted commas, or maybe some Jewish Israelis from a certain political inclination. What can the Western model, and especially the American model in this sense, can tell us about Israel?
Well, I think the Israel case, some work I'm doing now, is very interesting. And first of all, there are laws in Israel that you can take away citizenship. Since 1952, when the citizenship law was enacted, and actually give a lot of different grounds to take away citizenship, and you can if you harm the state or something, that's like very general.
So it's very open-ended.
But the discretion of the interior minister. Later on, throughout the time when Israel will become more and more legalized, and actually there are the exact
Has
provision.
it ever been done? Has an Israeli citizen ever been done?
And it had been done. What's interesting is that it has been done, it almost never was done against Palestinians or terrorists or because of security reasons. There were, I think, 2 cases in the entire history of Israel of Palestinians or Israeli citizens who were stripped of their Israeli citizenship. Mainly because I think those cases were connected to terrorist attacks. They weren't terrorists themselves, but they the cab driver, I don't know, who aided like a terrorist. But it's like only 2 cases in the entire existence of Israel. I think it's very rare.
But there were Jews who were stripped? Yes?
Yeah, but there were the Jews. And this is actually something which happened much more and still happens. And the reason is not security, is about because of the law of return. According to the law of return, you need to show that you're Jewish in order to immigrate to Israel and afterwards receive citizenship. And there is an accusation mainly against Jews who come from the former Soviet Union, that their Jewishness is suspected, in a sense. So the interior minister comes and asks them for more documentation and to show that they're really Jews. And if they're unable to do that, they are stripped of their citizenship. So actually Jews are more...
After they got it?
After they got it.
But so why did they get it if they couldn't prove that they were
probably they gave originally some documents, and after they got the citizenship, they're like the interior minister tried to like question their documents. Yeah, if they couldn't prove it in the first place.
But on grounds of treason and stuff like that.
No.
So even I don't know, Mordechai Vanunu is still an Israeli citizen.
I mean, actually, Mordechai was a nice case. I mean, but I will talk about it in a minute. No, I mean, socially, yes. Almost every time there is a spy, a left intellectual, someone who is supposedly a traitor or perceived as such, there are voices, like you see in the media and politicians, who will say, let's strip of his or her citizenship. It's allowed by the law, but let's do it. But they never did. It's just like a open, like a more political move rather than a legal one. What's interesting about Vanun is that actually he wants He wants
Oh, yeah,
to
that's
be
true.
stripped of his Israeli citizenship, and he asked several times to. He said, "Well, your Israeli law says that you should take citizenship away from convicted, traitors, and I'm a convicted traitor, and so take out my citizenship away. I don't want to be Israel anymore."
Yeah.
He said, "I don't want to be Israel." I
Yeah,
want
and
to
he's not allowed to travel either.
But they decided once and again that not to take his citizenship away. In a way, there is a reason, because if he's a citizen, the country can actually exercise more power over him, have more regulation as an Israeli citizen. And once you take away his Israeli citizenship, theoretically he can go anywhere in the world and the state cannot regulate him anymore. But they actually in this case, they used this convention against statelessness against him, because they said, well, he doesn't have dual citizenship. So we cannot take his citizenship away because he will be stateless.
Yeah.
So he tries to say, well, I have promises actually from different countries around the world. Say, well, we'll give you citizenship once you arrive. But he needs to arrive there, yes. Sure. So this is the problem. Yeah. But,
so would you say that generally, both in the United States, Israel, and other democratic countries, the revocation of citizenship is predominantly a technical thing because of all sorts of clashing circumstances.
Well, today it's presented
rather
as,
than an ideological.
Well, today it's presented as technical rather, but as most of the 20th century, and this is what I show in the book, it's very emotional, very cultural understanding that of allegiance should be single, that you cannot have multiple allegiances. Today it may be more technical, but it doesn't mean that it cannot become more emotional in the future and more something to do about identity. And as I said, because it's very much connected to wars and military conflict, so we don't know really. I mean, there might be changes in the future, although the legal system does not allow it.
All right, Dr. Ben Herzog, lecturer at Ben Gurion University's Institute for the Study of Israel and Zionism, and the author of the new book, Revoking Citizenship, Expatriation in America from the Colonial Era to the War on Terror. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
And also big thanks to Tammy Goldenberg, our sound engineer, and to the Van Leer Institute for the generous support. If you like this podcast or many more where it came from, just go to www.tlv1.fm/podcasts and take your pick. Our co-host Dalia Shendin will be back with us shortly, but in the meantime, go to our website, follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and don't forget to join us again next week for another edition of the Tel Aviv Review. And until then, goodbye.